Hello, I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, and you're watching Free Press Live, brought to you by Free Press, a nonprofit, nonpartisan media reform advocacy organization. Free Press Live is your weekly source for updates and live discussion of what's happening in the world of communication rights. You can learn more about our work at freepress.net, and you can follow us on social media at Free Press. In the next half hour, we're going to be talking about the digital divide and a new program that will help facilitate access to the internet. Today, the Federal Communications Commission rolled out its $3.2 billion emergency broadband benefit program to provide a monthly discount to millions of people struggling to afford internet access. Congress mandated the benefit as part of the December stimulus bill. Policy Counsel Leo Fitzpatrick from Free Press and national organizer from Media Justice, Brandon Farser, will join us today to talk about what's next and how the program will impact the digital divide. But before we talk with our guests, we have some news headlines. Last week, the Facebook-funded oversight board ruled that the platform giant should continue its suspension of Donald Trump's Facebook and Instagram accounts. The board told Facebook that it must complete its review of its decision to suspend Trump within 6 months of today's date. Media 2070 co-creator Joseph Torres made the following statement. By suspending Trump's accounts in January, Facebook, perhaps unwittingly, took a small but critical step towards addressing the larger crisis of anti-Black media racism. Now that the oversight board has upheld the ban, Facebook must reassess the ways in which its business model continues to endanger Black people and communities. Silicon Valley has profited greatly from amplifying racist propaganda and owes a major debt to Black communities in the long overdue mass media transformation these times demand. For more information about the movement to stop hate on platforms like Facebook, you can search the hashtag #StopHateForProfit or change the terms. On Tuesday, more than 80 pro-democracy organizations and individuals sent a letter to the Administrative Conference of the United States, the ACUS, raising serious concerns about recommendations that could delegitimize mass public comments that are often submitted as part of government proceedings and rulemakings. Many of our organizations work to raise awareness of federal rulemakings and to lower barriers to public participation in these administrative processes, reads the letter the pro-democracy group submitted. They continue to say, we are troubled that your recommendations would be interpreted by agencies to treat or disregard bona fide mass comments as an undue burden and to display comments in such a way that could easily obscure the number of individuals who have made their voices heard by expressing similar sentiment in comments. Last week, the New Jersey Attorney General's office announced its multi-year investigation found that the nation's largest broadband companies funded a secret multi-million-dollar campaign to influence the Federal Communication Commission's 2017 repeal of net neutrality rules and Title II classification of broadband internet access service. The scheme resulted in millions of fake comments filed at the agency, as well as 500,000 fabricated letters to Congress to give the false appearance of public support for the Trump FCC's eventual repeal of open internet protections. Free Press's co-CEO, Craig Aaron, made the following statement. The New York Attorney General's office has exposed a massive fraud financed by the nation's biggest phone and cable companies to drown out authentic public support for net neutrality. Knowing the vast majority of people in the United States wanted to preserve the Obama-era open internet rules, industry lobbyists hired shady operators to trick people into supporting their positions. This is outrageous and illegal. And if you recall, Free Press led a huge effort to get all of your public comments to support net neutrality and Title II classification. For more information about that campaign, you can visit our website at freepress.net. Today, we're going to continue talking about internet and the digital divide. Again, the emergency broadband benefit is part of the emergency COVID-19 response by the federal government. It provides a direct payment by the government towards internet bills of up to $50 or $75 on tribal lands for eligible households. The program is temporary but begins today and will last until the $3.2 billion fund runs out. The program is anticipated to last for at least several months. Our guests today are going to tell us more about this program, who is eligible to apply, so that you can have free and discounted internet access. So I'd like to welcome our guests to the show. First up, we have our colleague at Free Press, Leo Fitzpatrick.
Thanks for having me on.
Hi, Leo. For folks who don't know, Leo is an attorney at Free Press who serves as policy counsel, supporting the policy team's efforts to protect the open internet, prevent media concentration, promote affordable broadband deployment, and safeguard press freedom. So thank you so much for all of your work and for coming on the show to tell us about the EBB.
Sure. Thanks again, Vanessa, for having me back on. I'm glad that I didn't scare you all off with my last appearance. Very much appreciate having the opportunity to discuss what's not only the exciting launch of the important program, but a very important measure to actually help ease the burden for low-income communities who are particularly harmed under the current pandemic. So I'm also honored to be here with Brandon Forrester at Media Justice, who's taken a very prominent leadership role to make sure that folks become aware of this benefit and can take advantage of it. So I wanted to thank Brandon and also you and Colette for featuring this as part of this program, and huge fan of the show. So in some ways, the program represents a kind of culmination of what many advocates, especially Free Press, have known all along, way before the pandemic. Broadband prices are way too out of the reach for low-income families and communities of color, especially when our society is forcing folks to be more and more reliant on the ability to stay connected. And as most folks have probably heard over and over, the pandemic has really exacerbated and really laid bare the impact of the pandemic on the ability for folks to stay connected. So as you mentioned, the emergency broadband benefit is a temporary benefit. It's $3.2 billion as part of Congress's response to the pandemic. It offers a monthly benefit of up to $50, and in tribal lands, it'll be up to $75. It's for low-income families, students, and others who've lost their jobs or had a significant loss of income due to the pandemic. It helps cover some of the cost of any broadband plan that's provided by a participating internet provider. For low-cost plans, if it's less than $50 or less than $75 in a tribal land, the benefit could actually offset the entire price charged to the customer. For plans that are a little bit more, it would still offer that significant discount on the higher tiers. So who's going to be actually eligible for this benefit? Primarily low-income families. It's for families that have an income that is at or below 135% of the federal poverty guidelines. For a family of four, for instance, that could be roughly $26,500 a year. But it will also depend on the size of families and will vary from household to household. But that's the general frame. And for folks that participate in certain programs because of their eligibility under those federal guidelines. So for example, SNAP, Medicaid, and even the Lifeline program, which is an existing FCC program that helps offset the cost of telephone or broadband service for those who qualify. It also is approved for folks, for students and families with students who qualify for free and reduced lunch program or the school breakfast program, and USDA community eligibility provisions for the last two school years. It's also eligible for families who've for households where a student received a federal Pell Grant for the current wartier. And it's also, there are many other sort of categories, but these sort of lay out who is eligible. And actually, whenever Brandon gets around to mentioning his excellent media justice explainer website, they have a very easy to read and follow list of sort of all of these eligibility criteria. Oh, Vanessa, I think you're muted, but that could be me.
That's right. Thank you. It takes teamwork to make the dream work. And related to that, this was a coalition with many organizations and people organizing across the country who are not just organizing for this particular legislation, but to bridge the digital divide in general. And with that, I'd like to bring on our next guest, Brandon Forrester, who is the national organizer for internet rights and platform accountability at Media Justice. Media Justice is building a powerful grassroots movement for a more just and participatory media, fighting for racial, economic, and gender justice in the digital age. Brandon has been an educator and organizer for over a decade, working on a broad range of issue areas, geographic areas, and campaign sizes, from local community campaigns to nationwide days of action. Welcome, Brandon.
Thanks for having me. Long-time viewer, first-time caller. So glad to be here.
I am glad you are here too. Tell us a little bit about your work at Media Justice, organizing for internet rights. What does that mean? And tell us about the significance of this legislation being passed and this money that has now been made available to Americans all across the country who lack access to the internet.
Yeah, well, all the work around the internet. I don't know how long this live stream is, but I think the most important thing I want to share, and what's been most meaningful to me during this pandemic, is the work that I've been able to do supporting this group of high school students in Baltimore. So this is it's an organization called SOMOS, Students Organizing for Multicultural and Open Society. And when they ended up going to remote learning, they found out that there was like a hidden secret that a lot of students had, that they didn't have the internet at home. And a lot of people didn't realize that it was a big problem for not just them, but other students, because it was kind of a shameful secret. And even though they had never organized about anything related to the internet before, this became the issue that was most important to them. And so the group of high school students realized that Comcast was the kind of incumbent, way I like to phrase it, is like monopoly mafioso kind of controller of Baltimore's internet marketplace, basically. And a lot of these students who did have internet access only had access through Comcast's discount internet program, which didn't even have speeds that were basically usable to attend virtual schooling. And so they end up having to make tough decisions about, which sibling would get to go to school, which student would get to go to school today, or would a parent be able to go to work. And those are the kind of decisions that students shouldn't have to be making. But the way that we got involved with them is they realized that, Comcast doesn't actually care about the communities that they serve. And so they weren't really that worried about these students who were disconnected in one city, or the students who were disconnected in all of these cities, all across the United States. It was also an epidemic of kind of a failure of our students during this pandemic also. I think it's all say that 3 million students are just completely missing from the school, not just like haven't been attending, but the schools have no idea where those students are. So these students reached out to another Media Justice Network member in Philadelphia, the Movement Alliance Project, who have a long history of trying to battle Comcast and get them to do the right thing. And they got connected with us, and it became a national campaign. And, there's a lot more to that story, but I think the moral of that story is this shouldn't come down to high school students trying to fight a giant multi-billion-dollar cable and media corporation just to get their basic constitutionally guaranteed right to an education. And so, I think that that's the best way to kind of talk about what's been important work to me. And then, of course, Media Justice, we also help with this coalition that was mentioned. We're called the Lifeline Coalition. We're over 150 public interest advocacy and service-based organizations that have been fighting to make sure that this program that is similar to EBB but a little bit different, called Lifeline, is thriving and robust and is useful for folks to get them connected. But also we want to make sure that not just that these telephone or kind of wireless services are available, but we're trying to fight to make sure that the internet is affordable and accessible for all people. And so this EBB program has been a really important program that coalition-wide we've been fighting for. And we're really excited for it to start today because we know that the biggest part of the digital divide is the affordability gap. And so this is not a perfect solution. This is not a long-term solution, but this is something that's going to immediately have a huge impact for families.
Do you have a concern that people are not going to find out about this program and access it? And if so, what can we do to ensure that people that need it the most are able to access this benefit?
Yeah, I mean, that's my biggest concern that literally keeps me up at night. Challenge of making sure that the disconnected know about this, and our folks who have a connection but may not have a reliable connection or may use wireless service for connection. It's similar to the challenge of the census and trying to reach hard to count populations, but it's also similar not just because it's hard to reach folks who might be literally not connected to the internet, versus kind of the target audience, but also it's difficult because, like I mentioned before, Comcast and these giant ISPs, who most of us have to choose from, are not trusted by the communities that most need this benefit. And we also know that government programs aren't very trusted by these folks who most need this benefit. And so we have a situation where we both need to do an incredible amount of outreach about this program, make sure that everybody knows about it and they've heard about it from all these different places. But we also need to make sure that folks are hearing about this program from trusted messengers in their communities, and that they're hearing about this program in a way that's accessible and makes sense to them and they can understand it. And so that's why one of the things that we've worked on at Media Justice, with help from our Media Justice Network, with help from folks like Leo and other folks in the Lifeline Coalition, is trying to build out this website, ebbhelp.org, which just is to help people to understand and to be able to walk through and know exactly what to expect when they're trying to apply for the program. Because another kind of difficulty that we know, this program was thrown together pretty quickly because it's an emergency program. And so the eligibility process is built on top of the Lifeline process, but not all of the systems talk perfectly. And so with the Lifeline program, if people are going through a system where they're not able to get automatic approval, we know that there's a tendency for people to drop out of that application process. And so another reason we made this website is we want to make sure that people understand that you can apply for this benefit, how you're eligible, and then what that process will look like for you to be prepared for it, and not just start the process, but actually finish it and get connected to this internet service that we all of us desperately need.
All right, so if you are listening, make sure you spread the word and you let people know that this program is available, especially if you're somebody that works with the public and in communities. Share that website, EBB Help, so that people will know how to apply and access this benefit. That's right, ebbhelp.org. I want to bring back on my colleague, Leo Fitzpatrick, to talk about the work ahead, because the reality is that there are still many communities across the United States that are not connected to broadband infrastructure. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work ahead, after this program expires? Is there a goal to make other demands on the Federal Communications Commission and internet service providers to make broadband more accessible?
Thanks, Vanessa. I think the most important thing top of my mind, I think it's good to look forward into the future, but I think one of the more immediate goals here is actually to focus on making sure that people sign up, people are aware about the program, and we keep an eye on the need, right? Like, we're in a point where there's a lot of complacency. We haven't actually vaccinated enough people quite yet, and the pandemic rages on. So, with many businesses and schools not opening for some time, a lot of them fall or even going well into the subsequent year, we need to make sure that this program can meet the needs of folks. So essentially keep an eye on that. And then if it needs to come to it, we might have to put more money into the program, or make adjustments, as sort of Brandon just alluded to make it easier for folks that to sign on who might need it. And then sort of looking past that, I think one of the most, I hate saying something is an opportunity. This pandemic is terrible. It's sown a lot of misery for a lot of folks. But the one thing that we can look to is that this EBB program, the Emergency Broadband Benefit, as we call it, or have come to call it, essentially addresses, again, an issue that we've long identified as a problem, that people just can't afford internet. I've heard many stories about, communities in downtown Detroit where there is literally fiber strung across the front of a house, and the family just can't afford to pay for the company to string it into their home and actually take advantage of it. And if we can sort of look at how this program plays out, we might actually be able to potentially look further, as I think Brandon also alluded to, and also with the Lifeline program, sort of see how all these different factors, and the reason the Lifeline program is actually important is that's the more permanent program. That's existed since the mid-1980s, and is a program that is going to exist after this EBB ends, if it does end, and doesn't get extended or altered in some new iteration. So with all of these sort of things, we can actually start tackling the affordability, the probably one of the biggest barriers for folks to actually get connected.
Yeah, the high price of internet is certainly a challenge, and also for high-speed internet. In our News Voices project, we interviewed and collaborated with high school students in Newark, New Jersey, all of whom had internet, but many of them complained that their service was slowed down, not only because they had probably one of the lower tiers of service available to them, but because everybody in the household was also virtual learning and working from home. And so even though they had access to the internet, the speeds were slow and they were often disconnected. And this negatively impacted their schoolwork, especially when they have to be online for 7 to 8 hours a day. So certainly that is another issue that needs to be addressed. I want to bring Brandon back on here for the last question, which is for both of you. Can you talk about how the digital divide and internet access is also a racial justice issue? Brandon, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, like we mentioned before, it's the affordability gap is the largest gap, or is the gap that creates the most people are on the wrong side of for the internet. And so there are kind of, the way that I think about it, there are a few ways that people are divided, and one is affordability. We know that that's an issue for, as you and Leo mentioned, for Black folks, for Latinx folks, for other communities of color. That's an issue for folks that are on tribal lands, often in rural areas. There's also an infrastructure issue that we usually hear about as being a rural issue, but that's not just a rural issue. And we also know, I think actually studies from Free Press in 2018 showed that even in rural areas, there's still disparities about the investments that are made in rural communities of color versus white rural communities. And certainly we know that on tribal lands, that the digital divide is in many ways the worst of any place at all. But what we also see is that there's an infrastructure gap in cities, and that's called digital redlining. And the reason it's called redlining, for folks who don't know, is that there still is to this day, but there used to be in the 50s and 60s actual federal housing rules that prevented Black and other people of color from actually getting housing in certain parts of the cities. And if you look at those maps of where Black folks and other communities of color were excluded, and you look at the maps today of where the internet is excluded from communities, those two maps basically would overlap in many cities. That's true if you look in Oakland, if you look in Baltimore, if you look in Philadelphia. And so there are many ways that we can talk about how and why the digital divide is a racial and racist digital divide. But I think just understanding that there's an intentionality behind these giant corporations who their motivation is not to serve people with the internet. Their motivation is to make money. And so they don't see our communities as profitable to them. And so that's a part of it too. But I'll pause and let Leo kind of talk about his view of the digital divide as a racial divide.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm actually drawn to the notion that there are two reports, and sort of the connection that I make. I draw a connection between the two. In 2016, Free Press released a report that demonstrated that part of the digital divide was racialized. This is a really important study that a lot of folks have looked to regularly. Unfortunately, it came at precisely the wrong time to have a very hostile FCC who refused to look at that, and in fact trumpeted and cheered on the ISPs. And that kind of leads into this second report that we just released on pricing. And we found over a certain period of time that the price of broadband service had gone up 4 times the rate of inflation. So between the two, you can imagine not only is there this divide that we've racialized divide that we've identified, but you've actually made it even more difficult for folks to even get a hold of broadband access. So that's primarily where we come from in identifying the disparate impact on communities.
Thank you so much to both of you for shedding light about the digital divide, this program that is really amazing and will certainly help millions of people across the country get access to virtual learning, to applying for jobs, to signing up for vaccines. We see that that's a really big barrier for people in scheduling appointments to get a vaccine, is that they don't have internet access. And so again, Brandon, tell people one more time how they can plug in, learn more about the program, and spread the word about the EBB.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of resources out there. The FCC has a lot of resources. If you're interested in kind of social media or PSAs, and anybody really can be somebody that can help spread the word, whether it's talking to your local church community, whether it's talking to your local school district. But one great way to help make sure that people understand how to sign up for the program and how they're eligible and how it works is to send them to ebbhelp.org or ebbhelp.com. You can see on the screen, and it'll help make sure that folks know exactly what they need to apply. And it's, even though it's a little different for each kind of eligibility group, it's really not that difficult of a process. And especially if you're able to connect with somebody local, like a librarian or a school district, or even through a local provider to get signed up.
Thank you so much. There's also an EBB hotline that you can call. Again, not everyone can go to the website because they don't have internet access, but there is a phone number operated by the federal government. It's open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week. That number is 1-833-511-0311. We'll put that number in the comments. It is on the ebbhelp.org website. So make sure you follow Media Justice and Free Press to learn more about this issue. Thank you, Brandon and Leo, for joining us today on Free Press Live.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Free Press Live. Again, we encourage you to take advantage of this important broadband benefit and to let people in your community know that this resource is available. You can find more information about Free Press and the work that we do at freepress.net. You can follow Media Justice at mediajustice.org, and you can follow us both on social media. Make sure you don't miss the next episode of Free Press Live, airing Wednesdays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Make sure you get every episode. And you can also turn on the alert for notifications if you're watching on Facebook. Thank you for everyone who has joined us today. I want to give a special shout out to the Free Press Live crew, our executive producer, Colette Watson, Candace Clement, who is our tech director, Vanessa Bell, our social media coordinator, Dana Floberg, who is one of our co-hosts, and also Lucia Martinez, who is our digital strategist. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber. We'll see you next time.